Hey guys, Mustached Tom here to review Squid Game Season 3. So this will be a spoiler review, so if you don't want to get spoiled on the ending of Squid Game, I would recommend, if you are interested in the show, then watch it first on Netflix obviously, and then come back here. And of course I'm going to be looking at it as objectively as conceivably possible. With that being said, we pretty much continue where we left off, and where that was a continuation of our main character in his journey to his original journey was to try to subvert, this the game, as it were, and this latter half was really much more about completely deconstructing his idea. And for the sake of this is not a story that has a necessarily hopeful or happy ending per se by any means. I mean, that many people dying even in the first game, by that metric of obviously there is that the landscape of which the original Squid Game had created. So, by this same metric, of course, obviously, there is no true happy ending unless there could have been an end to the Squid Game, and I'm just gonna say that right out of the gate, that is not where this show ends. Now, while I would argue that there are some predictable moments in this season, primarily for some of the characters have been set up along the way, I would argue simultaneously some of the other characters and moments that come from that were actually a little bit less predictable. So I guess I'll go in order of that. So, from the more predictable, but, still emotionally charged, is the mother and son who came in together. This was a very predictable but again emotionally charged aspect of looking at the game. And the particular game in question is hide and seek. Now, what I will say is that I think it's three final games in this particular season. I think that's the amount that it's up to. There might have been four, I forget, but the exact amount. But point being is that the games themselves are still in the extremely simplistic realm of the quote-unquote children's games, right? Hide and seek, jump rope, and the aforementioned Squid Game being the penultimate, obviously, with a slight elevational twist to it this time around versus the first season. So, with the game of hide and seek, we have a majority of blue voters, but there is a slight split between them in this game, I think, but a majority, I think, still sort of say on the same side-ish. And of course, every game has its little hiccups and little tricks and deceptions to them. This particular game is cruel in that you need three type of keys. These keys in this hide and seek game grant you access to more of the area to better hide yourself for the hiders, and then there are the seekers who all are given knives. And it's interesting to see that deconstruction immediately of our main character taking place here already in this game, as early as this game. Him blaming the guy that couldn't grab the ammo and bring it back. So he purposely chose to be on the seeker side to particularly find this guy And of course, there is the I don't even know if this would qualify as revenge, as this guy didn't really, I wouldn't say did anything to quantify revenge in this way, but this is I would say a different mechanism of not quite revenge, but more so of shifting blame, or because after he does the deed pretty late in the game, as per usual, he does come to terms with it. He came to believe that it was his fault, that this all fell apart. And deconstructing that more with the introduction of a new character in the baby. Now, this is where I would argue the show takes a bold decision with the baby in an unpredictable way. There were a few outcomes I potentially saw. The least likely after the jump rope game, because I believe she gave birth during the hide and seek game, or slightly before then. I don't remember the exact timeline, but she has the baby by the bridge jumping game, and she had been injured in the hide and seek game, I believe it was. To the point where her leg was injured, so her capability of being able to surpass, the obstacle, obviously, the moment that happens, it becomes quite predictable what the outcome of that is going to be. Again, contrasted that against what the baby's outcome is going to be. But getting back to the mother and son, it was only a question of who was going to do who in, and it was the mother who killed the son in order to help the pregnant, who she just gave birth. I believe this is a scene. And simultaneously, within that same game, the trans character simultaneously also perishes. Now, I will say that her arc felt a little underwhelming. I guess it really did come only to a base decision that she made in this scenario, which is she finds the exit, prematurely because the other two are hidden in this other room. She finds the exit. She has the capability of leaving, and she even thinks about it, but decides to head back. And it is that sole decision of, wanting to protect in this scenario, where you've already pitched so many people against so many other people, that risk was going to get her killed in this case. There really isn't much more to say on that end. But they have a final moment with the mother interacting with our main character, and so as to express that very outcome, as he very much had already blamed himself in a structure that has, broken their minds at this point, and that also carries over significantly for at least one of the other characters. That is quite persistent when he runs out of the drugs that Thanos had left behind. But obviously our main character takes the baby across the jump roping challenge. I think he's among the earlier ones to pass through, if not I think he's the second one to jump past, or maybe even the first, I forget which, but point being is that when someone else passes that point, the finishing line, that individual turns around and halts everyone. He immediately pushes off the next guy, and it becomes a standoff, of everyone who's currently on the bridge versus the guy pushing everyone off versus our main character. And it is these situations that are, able to bridge off of these types of games that manipulate and that money, mindset, and how far you've already agreed to come along. That mentality is, there is that structure of when the VIPs enter the situation. That is very much in line with pretty much dissecting this idea that, that these people will insurmountably do these things because their minds have already been lost to the idea. Just that little bit of extra money, it wouldn't hurt if that other person, got offed, whatever. That feeling, that expression is definitely carried off by that particular group. Of course, we have our secondary plot of them trying to find the island. This goes horribly, pretty bad, in that I think that they do find the island, but the ship captain, who's an informant, gets in on their updates, so that he kills pretty much the majority of them except the main cop guy who's in the first season, whose soul gets to the island just as witness the last moments of the game. And we'll get back to that moment in particular, because I think the deconstruction was complete well before then even. There is a particular strong moment of that deconstruction from our main character, who eventually just says, "You won. You know what? You won." And I think that pretty much sums up where I think this conclusion comes from. And I think it's actually reinforced by the dialogue at the end of the series, but we'll get there too. But I think that is very much explicitly like, we are, they are in a situation that is really bad, and I think like the after credits, or like, well, not after credits, but like the final moments, despite this being called the final season, kind of alludes to there's some more Squid Game stuff going on, obviously, because of course there would be, and we'll end there shortly. So by the time they reach our Squid Game, this is slightly different. There's about 8 competitors left. The baby replacing, because the mother dies, the mother's spot. So yes, the baby becomes a competitor, therefore taking that pool of money away from the other individuals. And this comes into the aforementioned, these individuals have been in here for so long that when they learn of this, they're like, fuck that baby. And, I think that is a bizarre criticism against pro-life people that are particularly rich. Interestingly enough, not pro-choice, but I don't know. I think that is because the baby is alive. It's life, right? So I do think this is a kind of a mini criticism on that. I don't know if that's what that was meant to be. That's what I took away from it, at least. Maybe that's more subjective interpretation, but I like that it allows that to be an outcome rather than it just being like, there are quite a few explicit details, but I don't think any of them are necessarily bad and exploring. I think that Squid Game, even if within its first season, very much carried out a very direct message. In its wake of season 2 and 3, kind of being having to be split apart, I think in that bridge, that gap between quote unquote seasons 2 and 3, as it were, what makes that break work in this scenario is that this latter half, this particular third season, is, again, its bigger focus, not its only focus, but one of its bigger focus is that deconstruction that I kept mentioning earlier of our main character. Deconstructing his ideals of what humanity could be, or what humans ought to be, and what they shouldn't be, and how much is altered through the lens of money, and that much money in particular. And juxtaposing that in the original sense to, seasons 1, the Squid Game, and the child aspect of it. I'm not sure, that could go a few ways of what that represents, I'm pretty sure, but I don't have anything off the top of my head necessarily right now, but I digress. So anyways, in Squid Game, the penultimate episode, the final episode rather, they have the Squid Game elevated by the 3 shapes, the triangle, square, and circle. Starts with a square, which would be the biggest, amount of space, then circle, then triangle, I believe was the shape order. Or it might have been triangle, square, circle. I remember what the shape order was exactly. Anyway, it definitely starts off square, and at this juncture you have an overwhelming majority voted blue. Those are the participants who have invested in wanting to play the next game each time, and that number has grown steadily throughout, and this is like the extra stab in the main character of seeing that those numbers through this democratic process really demonstrate just how far driven these individuals have become for that little bit extra money, because of how far in debt they were. So yeah, obviously you could have taken this quite a few ways, and I think that there will be people who will say the Squid Game should have been torn apart by the happy ending for our group, but I don't think so. I don't think that every story necessarily needs to have that happy ending, and I do feel like in conjunction with season 1 in particular, I do think that having not only just deconstruction of the main character happening, but having the ending sequence being what it is, I think really hits the nail of a firm stance of where we ought to be. Right, so we get to the final three, which is our main character, the original father, apparently, of this baby, and the baby, I don't remember if it was a male or female, so I'll just keep saying the baby, because I don't remember. I think it was a girl. I think. If memory serves, I could be wrong, so I'm just gonna go off on a limb there. Anywho, so you have, this baby, the father, and the main character here on the final, right at before the final platform, essentially, and essentially, how this is set up for the purposes of this is once you're elevated on these platforms, there's a red button in the middle. The red button starts the game, and the rule is relatively simple. You only have to knock off one person in order for everyone else to potentially make it to the next round. It is the middle round that fucks everything up. This is where everyone just, that mindset of I have to survive and I don't even know if I can trust the rest of these guys, and the main character is kind of getting back into that it's like the flip of a switch, and I think that is very much that again pretty much giving the antagonist everything they want. The leader of the one that's hosting the Squid Game, essentially, the guy on our left here. Part being that, eventually he hands the baby over, but then he leaps onto the platform. So now they're on the final platform. It's the three of them. And again, you only would have to knock off one person. The father clearly wants to survive, our main character clearly wants to survive, and obviously there's the baby. So now we have ourselves quite the predicament here, because everyone else on the previous, stage had been kicked off. In fact, the blue team, as it were, they crippled this one guy to be like, hey, we'll just carry him across. He'll be our get out of jail free card. And that seems like they're, like this vast majority group, selection that has been the first stage. Now the second stage completely falls apart the moment our main character flips that switch. And you see the guy in the front that's trying to poke him over, or the baby over, rather, at this juncture. He's pretty much now our main character is pretty much saying, "Hey, these guys behind you, they could betray you, man. I mean, look at them. They're talking, it seems suspicious, and that simple, little moment that we see as the audience as well." Clear as cut as can possibly be, drives that wedge, gets everybody all flustered. You have the father, confessing that he is indeed the father at this juncture, at this point. The others, are dismantling and being like, they take out the other guy, as I mentioned, trying to use him as like a get out of, stage free, essentially, kind of bargaining chip. I believe they kind of use a Western phrase of, they say refrigerate the character, I believe, like, and I think this is allude to like fridging. I think. I don't know if that was necessarily what they were trying to get across, but if, I guess there's a slightly different saying over there that's meant for something else slightly. point being is that guy that, that they beat up pretty much kills himself. He's like, no, I'm not gonna be that guy for you. And he was like, because they're, it whittles down to the four of them, and then they're, the father's trying to convince him, like, hey, don't, backdrop to your death and all, and he does so anyway. So yeah, the father and the main character fight. The button is never pressed is the problem, because it becomes, it's that instinct of, that the ability to think is dwindling so fast by the time you've already reached that second platform, and it is gone by that. It is, it's such a three interesting block structure that there's, you can just dissect just like how far the characters lose themselves by each stage. And this is the penultimate of that, where the two of them are fighting, the father and our main character, and they haven't even pressed the button to start the round officially. And it does end before the button is ever pushed, with the father dropping to his death and our main character holding on to like this ledge that he can grapple up to. But he knows that if he doesn't press the button, that at some juncture, because I think this is what happens in the second round, they take way too long and the game starts by itself anyway. So he knows that this game is going to inevitably start. And it just so happens it is just now him and the baby, and the round has officially started. So yes, a person must be cast away. And that brings us to the the not predicted part, because I didn't even think that they were going. I thought that what was going to happen. I thought that it was going to be more than one survivor, first of all. And I thought the father and the main character were both going to live, and it was going to be a trifecta of sorts. But no. Instead, our main character addresses our VIPs directly before dropping himself, meaning he's dead too. The main character dies. That's a big spoiler, in case that wasn't clear by this juncture. But point being is that he reiterates something that was from the first season. We are not horses. Humans are. And here's the interesting part, is that when he says humans are is when he drops. He never finishes what he was going to say before he drops. And I think that encapsulates the main antagonist's win with that hammer, subtextually without having to say it. He, at least from my perspective, this is what I read when he was saying this. He couldn't come up with an answer. Humans are what? And he just dropped. He just said humans are. And then there's that empty drop, as it were. But of course, the baby wins Squid Games. That is also what that means. And we follow up past that point of the game to see our little moments that precede it. That being that we move to America at some juncture. The main antagonist brings the clothing of the main character to the daughter from, season 1. It was established there, I think, I'm pretty sure it was, that she moved to America, and she's given his earnings from probably the first Squid Game that carries over, I guess that substantially helps her at the very most, I guess. And it's so interesting, again, flipping another switch, when he's first interacting with her, she's talking about, like, oh, I don't want to see him, my father, don't, kind of giving up on that idea, and then immediately he says, our antagonist pretty much says, he passed, and that flip, you see it in the performance of, like, oh shit, like, oh, everything I was just saying, it just halts, because that revelation just hits that hard, obviously. And, I think that really cements another, like, mini, like, a little last minute, like, hey, for the people who may not be around for a while, make sure that you leave on good terms, I think is sort of what they're trying to get across here in particular. However, that is not our final moment. In fact, our final moment is learning that indeed Squid Games has moved to America, as we see a new game starting up. We see this lady in the suit playing the flip game with the red and the blue box shapes. I forget what the game is called exactly off the top of my head, but we see that happening in the street corner of Los Angeles, where we end Season 3 of Squid Game, meaning that it is now, and I think that the timing is fairly apt considering how bad our economic situation in America is becoming. I think this is extremely timely, speaking of other things outside of this, but I'll just leave that there. To say that I think that this season, say what you will about the original, like, in the whole arguments about, like, the whole police finding them bit was, like, kind of going nowhere for a while there. Things sort of cap off, as it were, pretty drastically against that. Maybe they heard the criticisms, and maybe they were just planning to do this, like, sort of big, like, escalation of where that was going. But another side plot that I'm not gonna neglect to mention was the one pink suit or red suit. I don't know what color that suit is. It's like I guess it's closer to pink, technically speaking. So I'll aim there. The pink suits, one of them, the female that we were following kind of in Season 2 there, we see that she successfully exfiltrates the individual that she was meaning to exfiltrate, that father that we seen from get shot in that last moment, and then, but not die, obviously. So we also follow them to that final point. And, there's a care provided, apparently, for his daughter. I forget, like, how the output of that came about necessarily, but, I think there was some levels of communication back and forth that allowed that to facilitate itself, I guess. So that's where his journey ends. So there is another alternative survivor, technically speaking, of Squid Game, outside of the baby being the winner of Squid Game, that being obviously the baby given its money, but being provided to somebody else as, like, here you go, enjoy that baby and a whole loads of money. That baby is going to be set for life, or, like, for a good while anyway. with that level of money unless it continuously makes bad decisions. But hey, you never know with these things. Anyway, point being is that Squid Game ends with, of course, there was never going to be an end to the games. Of course, it was going to move and get worse. And now, again, as I mentioned, gets to America. So while Squid Games ends, Squid Game is going to live on, I think. And maybe there's going to be an Americanized Squid Game at some point. I have a feeling there will be. I mean, they already had that, like, alternative, like, elimination of, I forget what it was called. It was called Squid Game, and there was, like, a subtitle to it. I watched all of that, by the way, and, the people complaining about the working conditions of that. But, that was an American thing, I'm pretty sure. The obvious caveat being, obviously, they weren't going to kill people in real life. These are actors, essentially, kind of in a, taking on these roles in a sort of scripted sense, I suppose, way. It was one of those types of shows with Squid Game elements without the killing, so they would just remove you from the game. I think they, like, when you were eliminated, they, like, shot them with, like, these little pellet guns or whatever. I'm pretty sure that's how that went when it came to eliminations. But in terms of there being a Americanized Squid Game, I'm referring to a more, a more closer to this Squid Game where it's like, it's obviously killing people and the actors, have to be prepped for that instead. I don't know if that's gonna happen, when that's gonna happen, but I suspect that it might. If Squid Game's popularity, from this season carries forward, that is very much a real potential. So, yeah, in terms of overall, I would say I think this season carried out everything it needed to pretty much do everything that I think it wanted to, the writers wanted to specifically. Like, there's stuff that I thought they were going to go, but I can completely see and understand what they were trying to achieve, and I think they achieved it quite well here. And, I think there was a mention in Season 2 a lot. A lot of people really, in comparison to Season 1 particularly, a lot of people bring up the marble game. This is the last thing I'll talk about here. And there was always this thing on the back of my mind of that episode in particular accomplishes a lot. You have your various groups playing various games, and we're following, group by group by group. You're getting payoff by payoff by payoff, and obviously those payoffs have negative connotation in this scenario, but it's still very much a boom, 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 boom. We're hitting a lot with that, and there was this criticism I was hearing as early as Season 2 mentioning how, like, there was no game that kind of reached that level, and there is the feeling in the back of my mind at the very most of, if they repeated a game outside the first, obvious one, which is red light, green light, which I think that's an opening that, is so interesting when you have that player that knows, and our main character as early as that, that changes that much of the game. it changes how much people are interacting with the game. Now that you have someone who knows what's going on and how serious it is, versus obviously, it's almost left now up to chance that someone died in that or like the animal landing or the bug landing on somebody and them freaking out. Obviously, had to be like a thing that sort of circumvented this potentiality for almost everyone making it, if not everyone making it in the first round. And you have like that additional 100 or so people now. But, getting back to the marble idea is that while if they were to, create a scenario that would mirror the marble game in particular, where it's like boom, 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 I fear that there would now be a criticism that would be the opposing mirror that would be now saying, well, now it's just too much like Season 1. Now we're just repeating stuff we've seen before. I think that this was a much more clever way of having things a little bit more spread out, but you're still getting the payoffs of the characters we have been following, the mother and son. The trans character kind of just, I feel, is a little bit underwhelming, I suppose, but it's, it still is a moment, I suppose. You have the baby, which plays the biggest role, if anything, of how much changes when that is brought into the equation. And yeah, I think that, spacing it out with these different games was a much more, I think it was a better move in the context of, we're not going to be repeating things here, and we're still going to get the payoffs we've been looking to try to achieve from the writer's perspective on top of that. So it does twofold, really. So there's that. And that's really the end of what I have to say about Squid Game Season 3. I think I'm going to give this particular season, I think I gave the original Squid Game like a 9 out of 10 or like something along those lines. It's been a while since I've seen it, so I don't recall my exact score. But I think this, in turn, is very much like a 9 out of 10 for me. I think it still very much carries out everything that it needs to say in a very effective way in the episodes that it has left. And with that, I will say that that is my review of Squid Game. It's the final season, apparently. But hey, there's that nudge again. Anyway, if you ended up enjoying this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. And want to head over to my petition about small YouTubers, second to my PayPal, we can help support me and my channel directly, and third to my Discord server. We can join Collab Shield, do that cool stuff for free, and until next time, everyone, bye-bye.